So the story that we are about to read is The Landlady, and in The Landlady, there are many examples of irony as well as foreshadowing. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start with irony. When something is ironic, that means that a situation that is strange or funny because things happen in a way that seems to be the opposite of what you expected. So because things happen in a way that seems to be opposite of what you expected. So when you expect the exact opposite of what actually happens, that is irony. Now, there are three main types of irony, and we're going to fill in the definitions, and then you're going to give examples after you read the story. So, the first one is situational irony, and it's just the most basic irony. So, situational irony is a contrast between what a reader or a character expects and what actually exists or happens. Make sure that you're filling this in on your copy. So again, that's the most basic type. So it's when it is the opposite of what the reader or a character expects to happen, and it has to be really the exact opposite in order for it to have the comedic effect that irony is supposed to have. Now the next type is dramatic irony. And dramatic irony is when the reader knows something that the character doesn't know. So the reader knows and when the reader knows something that the character does not know, it creates dramatic irony because you get that feeling as a reader that you're like, oh no, this is about to happen and they don't know what's going to happen. And so it builds up that dramatic irony. And then last but not least is verbal irony. And verbal irony is when someone knowingly exaggerates or says one thing and means the other. And I want to kind of emphasize the knowingly part. Because the character is doing it on purpose. So they're going to be saying the opposite or exaggerating something when they actually mean the opposite of what they're saying. And it's normally the exact opposite, which is why it is funny. And then down here we have foreshadowing. Now, I always like to start foreshadowing by telling my students to imagine that they are walking down the street. And you're beside of a building on a sidewalk, and you're walking down the street. And when you get to the very end of the building and you're about to round the corner, there are signs that you might run into someone who's walking the other way around the corner. And one of those signs, if the sun is in the right place, is that person's shadow. So you're going to see their shadow coming around the corner of the building before you run into them. And that's always how I like to remember foreshadowing, because in that example, their shadow is the clue that there's a person on the other side of the building so that you wouldn't run into them. And that's exactly what foreshadowing is. Foreshadowing is just the use of clues or hints to suggest events that are going to happen later on in the story. So the use so the clue is like the shadow of a later event. So when you see that shadow, you know in your head, in the back of your mind, that that's going to end up happening later on. And I have a couple of examples. So the first one that I'm going to give you is from Little Red Riding Hood. So in Little Red Riding Hood, before her mom, or before Little Red Riding Hood goes to her grandma's house, her mom has this whole conversation with her about how she's worried about her going through the woods because there are lots of dangerous things in the woods. So as soon as they have this conversation, this is foreshadowing that something, in fact, bad is going to happen in those woods, or there are dangers that are going to be waiting for her. So that's the first example. And that's the one that I want you to fill in. So that foreshadows, again, the danger of the wolf later on in the story. Another example that I can give you is from Avatar. So if you've seen Avatar, Grace, one of the scientists, says at one point, "I would die to get a sample," and she's referring to the Tree of Souls. And later, when she is wounded and possibly going to die, she's actually taken to the Tree of Souls. So her comment kind of foreshadows what will happen to her later on. And then if you've seen any of the Star Wars movies, there's tons of foreshadowing in those. So when they say things like, "Oh, I have a bad feeling about this," that's going to foreshadow that something bad is about to happen. Now you're going to go ahead and fill in this part here that says example from something I have read or seen. So you can fill that part in on your own of foreshadowing, but wait to fill in these 3 examples, obviously, until after you've read The Landlady, and this will be due on Tuesday after you've read the story. So you'll fill in all of those examples and then you can turn it in.